Good to see we're filling up. Thank you, Julia. Excellent presentation and a great way to start the day, chiming exactly with what we were hearing yesterday about the need for forward-thinking, progressive approaches to running modern media companies. Of course, the other thing we heard yesterday from Jerzy Baczynski from Poland was about the role of politics and the interface between politics and media. And our next panel are all extremely well qualified to discuss that, but rather than me introduce them, please welcome back, you remember him from last night, the Senior Partner at Innovation Media Consulting and Fellow at the Reuters Institute for Journalism, Juan, Señor.
Thank you. Right, so I often talk about digital disruption. Today, this morning, a very important topic we often do not discuss here, but it's relevant we discuss today, political disruption. And it's out there. We've always had heat as publishers. It's always been there. But at the moment, we really are facing flamethrowers in many countries. And it comes in many different flavors. And sometimes it's delegitimizing the press, Trump calling the media the enemy of the state. In other cases, it's more subtle. And we're seeing it in India, we're seeing it in Hungary, in Poland, perhaps not also becoming so subtle. But media ownership restrictions, laws, posturing, threatening, and of course tax inspectors knocking at your door to have a look at those books in closer detail. So it's getting subtle, and it's also getting not subtle at all. But political disruption is something we need to deal with, and we have a great panel. Let me introduce them to you and invite them to the stage. Jerzy, of course, began talking about this yesterday, and it's very important to hear his point of view. Jerzy Baczynski, please, a round of applause. He is with, of course, Polityka in Poland. Aroon Purie, Mr. Purie, are you here? There you are, sorry. So Aroon Purie, India Today Group. And two speakers from the States, because of course they've been dealing with this for quite a while now. Megan Murphy, editor of Bloomberg Businessweek. And we've got Kate Day with Politico Europe, here to talk about it. It's a very short segment. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
So what I thought we would do is each one of you just do an opening statement, tell us the state of political disruption in your countries, and then we'll mix and match it. So, Jerzy, over to you first.
Okay. As you perhaps remember, yesterday I tried to depict a gloomy picture of media position and situation under current government, populist government called Law and Justice. I mentioned that the first step they took was to take over public media sector, which is quite strong in our country. There are several TV channels and strong radio stations and National Press Agency. And they did it in a very simple way, just dismissed or fired people, over 300 journalists and commentators, and put as a head of the television active politician, very radical one, responsible for years for party propaganda. So they immediately, this television became a brutal propaganda tool. And, as I mentioned yesterday, for me, for my generation, is something we couldn't believe it could happen again. This reminds us in the Sir Communist time. They attack every day what they call the enemy of the state, enemy of people, which means, first of all, opposition, of course. The opposition leaders are a hero, black hero of each issue of news. And then European Union, which this has become enemy number 2. And then judiciary, and of course, migrants and refugees. Recently, they start to blame Germany, which is growing as a new enemy again, as a country which brought those rapists to Europe, and the government obligation is to stop infiltration of migrants to our beautiful country. But this was just a beginning, because as I mentioned yesterday, they cut subscription of opposition press by ministries and government agendas. They stop advertisement from state-controlled companies to those media. There are a lot of, they are multiplying charges or court persecution against media for defamation, but not only defamation. Just last week we had an experience that a journalist who published a book about our Ministry of Defense and his hidden ties with Russia, and that he was sued for more or less terrorism, active action against defense of our country. So what's going to happen next? We don't know. We all expect a new regulation concerning, as I mentioned yesterday, repolonization, or to control the capital and the media, or even to ban cross-media ownership.
And you're talking about Poland. It sounds like you're talking about Turkey or Russia. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and Hungary, which is the situation in my country is much better than in Hungary, because Viktor Orban has accomplished his mission in Hungary. He has a total control over media, and it was done in a very funny way, because the media outlets were purchased by his fellow businessman with unknown money, and finally they decided to close down the largest opposition daily, Nepsabaczek. So our government follows the path of Viktor Orban.
The same playbook.
Exactly, copied it.
Let's talk about India, Mr. Purie, because there has been subtle and not so subtle. And of course, the latest was the raid of NDTV, which really stood up to them. They literally just went into the newsroom and raided the place. So not subtle at all. But Modi's been quite subtle and clever in some ways as well. So it's not as overt as it is in Eastern Europe.
If I make a more general point, I think there is a crisis which is happening in the Western liberal democracy model, right? Which is the leaders are becoming much larger than the parties. The traditional parties seem to have failed. You see it in America with Republican Party, not endorsing Trump and getting in. And there's a disintermediation which has happened in politics, which is that the leaders appeal directly to the public. They don't need the press. They don't need the political parties, the political structures. The same thing happened in India in Modi. He overtook the party. He appealed directly to the people with populist measures that I will do this, I will do that. And people believed him. So the traditional political structures are vanishing. And he doesn't even need the press, right? Because he is appealing to the public directly. And in fact, Modi in his election campaign described the media as news traders, news merchants. You're into paid news, right? So completely discrediting the media. And I think that this is a thing which is happening. It's happened in Turkey the same way, right? Democratically elected leader, suddenly very populist, promising all kinds of things, and becomes then dictatorial. So I think that's a trend which is happening across the world in a sense. And other parties are coming up, fringe parties are not part of the traditional parties. And that's a crisis. If I may just, I came across this very wonderful book on tyranny. I really recommend people to read it. If I get permission to just say a few things on what's in this book. This is written by, he quotes a German scholar, Victor Klemperer, who was a diarist under the Nazi rule. And he says, under totalitarianism, truth dies in 4 modes. Open hostility to verifiable reality, presenting lies and inventions as facts, as we've seen with Trump. Endless repetition designed to make the fictional plausible and the criminal desirable. Build the wall, lock her up, right? Which suddenly, constantly repeated, becomes true. And then magical thinking, or open embrace of contradictions. That is, Prime Minister Modi, in his election campaign, promised people that I will bring all the illegal money which is stored by rich Indians abroad, and I will put 1.5 million rupees in everybody's bank account, right? People said, wow, fantastic, right? What does Trump say? Cutting taxes for everyone, eliminating national debt, and increasing social spending and defense. It can't happen, right? It's that kind of thinking. And then the last is self-deifying. I am the guy who can fix it.
Listen
right?
to me.
Listen to me.
Yeah, I am the source of truth.
I'm the source of truth. So I think that this is happening right across the world. And this is a dangerous trend. And I think that they're creating an atmosphere in what is now called, meaning it's a very dangerous kind of intangible thing. You create an atmosphere of what I would call anticipatory obedience. Right? So, and that's a tragedy.
Right.
So,
and if I may recommend another book, very relevant these days, 1984. We ought to have a reread, because a lot of it is exactly the same that is argued here. Megan, Kate, of course, no need for you to tell us what's going on in America. We all know about it. But Megan, perhaps with you, let's twist this a bit, because some people are capitalizing on this. And of course, there was a lot written about the Trump bump. And particularly Vanity Fair was the first one to say, buy the magazine, subscribe to the magazine that Donald Trump does not want you to read. So does it make sense to deal with this kind of populist leaders we're seeing emerging throughout, to say, fair enough, okay, let's play up on that and say, read what these guys don't want you to read, and try to build a business based on being the voice of the opposition?
I think that's a hugely interesting point that's been dissected across platforms. So if we look at Vanity Fair as an exception, a relatively small example of that. A much bigger one is the New York Times, the Washington Post. Obviously, people know that, or may not know in this audience, but that the Washington Post changed their slogan to "Truth Dies in Darkness." After the election, we've seen the biggest benefactor, and we should be very clear about this, has been CNN, has been MSNBC, has been the cable networks, because frankly, television remains the killer app for the kind of politics that we see playing out in America right now. Just to be really clear, you said they don't need the media. He certainly needs a platform, and he's used Twitter as that platform. So whether or not you want to make it as a content distribution, he has been the most effective mobilizer, actually, of the media and of other platforms that we've ever seen. And frankly, my profession was very late to sort of wake up to that and to see what it was doing. I headed up all of our political coverage during 2016, first for the Financial Times. I actually spent most of my career in London, and then for Bloomberg, and now at Businessweek. And there's no question that the phenomenon that Trump was something, having come from Brexit, you could see the very economic populism strains that were really driving America, particularly outside of the coast. But he was the sort of the perfect storm of a variety of trends we'd seen in media, but that we as sort of traditional players couldn't quite understand, using social to troll. He was the first candidate who really realized that Twitter was the perfect trolling mechanism. He was the first candidate to realize that appealing to his base, to not being rational, to making the kind of to act the way you'd never expect someone to be presidential was perfect for an era where we've sort of smashed the glass on reality. There was no line between reality television and what you saw playing out in the campaign. But in terms of the disruptiveness and fake news, the biggest issue we face, and I think the biggest disruption actually, is people no longer believe in establishment writ large. It's not just politics, it's not just the media, it's the education system. And that is the biggest danger. It isn't such rabid partisanship. It isn't the extremities on the left and the right. It's really that every day people who work hard, who want what's better for their children, who want a better future, who really just want to get through the day, no longer believe that their political class, their media class, their educational class, the elite they see, are actually doing anything to make their lives better. And that is, to me, really the most dangerous trend we see in Western
Without a doubt, that's the effect on society. But as a publisher, would it make sense for you to pick up a fight with one of these populist guys and do what Vanity Fair has done? With Bloomberg, Businessweek, try to pick up a fight. So therefore, you then capitalize on that and say, look, buy the thing that he's discrediting. So he says, because there seems to be very little else you can do about it. And it seems to be working. In America, part of the playbook is, fair enough, you discredit us, so we'll tell the readers, read what this guy says is discredited and not worth reading. So with Bloomberg, Businessweek contemplate that.
I mean, I think Businessweek, we've run more covers. We had Steve Bannon on our cover 2 weeks ago saying, what next? I think that, do I sit there and think as the editor when I'm making choices about what content to display, do I think, I'm trying to send a subversive message that Donald Trump won't want to read this and therefore go? No, I think that what we try and do is always to delve beneath the sort of fictional picture that's given of the administration and try and actually show people what's happening, not only in terms of what is said, what is done, what is actually happening behind the scenes. The most important players in the Trump administration, this is the thing that I think too gets lost a lot of the time. There are real things happening. They're stripping away the Clean Power Plan. They're limiting LGBTQs in all walks of society. There's massive changes to the way that education is funded, is looked at. There are regulations are being stripped away in finance, in energy, in very important things. That gets lost in a lot of the noise. And I am very much focused on getting beyond the noise and the hot air and the latest between Melania and Ivana, which I actually can't believe, was devoted to to that, and to try and dissect and go into what is happening in everyday people's lives. If the result of that is that it sells more or gets more subscription for Businessweek, I'm certainly not going to push it away.
Okay, let's talk about Politico. You're in the throes of this. You've seen the rise of this thing. Obviously, it started in other countries, but now it's come to America. What's your take on all this? How do you deal with this kind of extreme political disruption?
Well, I would add the third disruption. We've heard this morning about political disruption. We've heard about social disruption, and both are very self-evident. And across the world, I run Politico in London, based out of our office in Brussels. So we're covering Europe, but then work very closely with our colleagues in DC. And right across the world, you're seeing these two very disruptive forces. But I'd throw in a third one, and that's disruption to business models and disruption to the sustainability of our press. And that seems crucial to me, because I don't think we can start to combat this and explain it to readers and hopefully throw some truth into this melting pot of noise unless we have a sustainable, independent business model. So I think the three things are very interrelated, and probably more so than journalists traditionally would have acknowledged or would have been conscious of, because the business model was something those guys did over there in the other half of the business and not something that really mattered to journalists in the newsroom. I'm not saying that we in any way adapt our editorial line for business purposes, but being conscious that we're building a sustainable publication that keeps us independent, I think is crucial in this conversation about disruption.
And yet, one of the tools is to cut off the advertising and put pressure on companies that might get government contracts to pull the advertising off. So perhaps it doesn't matter how much you build your business model differently. If indeed you depend on advertising revenue, it could be gone tomorrow and you're in real trouble. You know? You're still in the throes of this. But let me put to you, we went to Italy a while back, and of course, they were telling us, the editors of Corriere della Sera and La Repubblica, they're saying, all these Americans are so concerned about Trump. It's like, we had Trump. We had Berlusconi for 12 years. And they said, we have a playbook. And they actually had a playbook. I've seen it. And they said after 12 years of this man, I don't know how many it was, 12, 13, they came to the conclusion that the trick to manage somebody like this is to report what he did, not what he said. Because their game in this intermediation is to deflect and distract. So if there's a real issue that comes up, you just basically throw in a tweet, and then the whole conversation, the narrative becomes that. So would you able to do that in Poland as news media publishers, in India, to actually stop reporting what these populists say and only report what they do?
I would dream of, but no, I don't believe it's a good method. Just contrary, because words matters. Words produce emotions, and emotions make politics nowadays. So you have to be in a constant discussion or debate of what they are telling, with their lies, with their fake news. And I don't think it's a good strategy for liberal media to let them tell whatever they wish. We have an extremely heavy experience in Poland with fake news produced on an industrial scale by government and its media. That's the problem, not fake news or alternative facts produced by trolls, financed by Putin or whatsoever. That's something which we were not prepared for. But this produced and is producing every day a deep polarization in the society. That's perhaps an objective of every populist in every country, to split society, to make a conflict between two tribes. All this rhetoric is focused on splitting or to maintain, to manage the conflict. And with this polarization, we lost even a basic solidarity in our industry, media industry. There is a deep conflict between media, journalists. There is no single journalist organization which could exist, and even publishers' organizations are divided. And the problem is that there is no longer public opinion in Poland. There are separate public opinions. So we can only address our message to our supporters. Right. And there is no bridge over the gap. That's quite tragic for communication.
What about how the Italians resolved the issue, how they brought down Berlusconi? Does that resonate? Could that ever be done by you?
Well, I think that I just want to make one point about our role as journalists. We should not lose our basic role of reporting in a balanced way. I mean, you don't like the guy in power. It doesn't mean that you become polemical, in the sense that then you'll become one of them. So I think that we must maintain our traditional role of reporting the facts, being as objective as we can, find the last obtainable truth, in a sense. So I think that however much you might hate the person in power, you must maintain that balance, right? Yes, you must continue to expose what is reality and what is myth. And a lot of these leaders have fantastical claims, right, which are not true. And I think the media's role in exposing that is the most important, in which you will find, the emperor has no clothes in the end. And I think that's what builds up public opinion. And that's kind of happening in India now. A lot of the hype which is there is suddenly being realized, look, it's not really what it was, but it's something else. And because the figures come out, the growth rate has gone down, unemployment is high. So these are facts. When they are highlighted, they really then expose the leader for all their shenanigans, in a sense.
Yeah. Megan, on this issue.
Well, I think that's incredibly well said, and I agree. But just it's indistinguishable, and here's why. Let's just give two examples. Let's talk about Charlottesville in the immediate aftermath, and this was an incident in the States where there was far-right demonstrators, and there was a car, and a woman was killed. And in the immediate aftermath, the president made comments that both sides had legitimate arguments. And the second is something we've seen playing out in the U.S. media for the past 2 weeks over kneeling in the NFL and whether or not that was disrespectful to the American flag. These are all, you could say these are statements. These are just words. The thing is, they cut to the very fiber of who we are as a society, what we want to be, what we think we're in a common bond for, what we're working towards as human beings. It goes far beyond politics or populism. people often say, and I always think about this with Davos, that populism is some outgrowth. No, it's, Davos is the problem. Populism is the response, and it's not a negative thing, and it's so frequently referred to as a negative thing. These are people who have felt marginalized, left behind, not included in our media, not included, don't have their seat at the table, constantly struggled, obviously in India as well. So much of this support is people who have simply felt excluded. And it's really hard to separate words that in many cases in America recently appear pretty overtly to a race-based or a fear of the other, to a fear of immigration. We've also seen it obviously in the UK, and to separate them from actual action.
But those are exceptions and outrageous things to have said. But generally,
that's every daily basis.
But generally, the criticism is that you amplify this nonsense that he spits out, and these guys spew out all the time, in your case, as you described, on an industrial scale. You amplify it, and they drive the narrative, and that delegitimizes you even more because you don't have own agenda journalism. So it's no accident what they're doing. It's very clever, and this deflect and distract, it's working. So
I don't think.
Shouldn't there be a different way of dealing with it?
Well, just to put, I hear the Berlusconi example all the time, and I always hear this: why can't you just report what he does, and why doesn't he said? And the issue is this: Berlusconi and Trump are very, very different examples, and it's not a very good example. The issue: he is the U.S. president, and the impact that has in. Particularly in a time where we place profound disruption, not only in media and what we're talking about here, but also the rise of China, what's happening on it, the massive shifts that we see. It's a totally different kind of role. And in terms of amplifying it, or whether or not we have, we sort of have, people have said, oh, journalism, you have blood on your hands for this. No, what we are doing is reflecting what he says and what he does. We are always grappling with trying to actually bring truth. That is our job, that is our mission, that is what we do on a daily basis. It is incredibly hard with an administration that lies openly on a daily basis to get to the truth of that matter. I am tremendously proud of the press and what they've done with Trump. There's no question at the beginning it was a massive disconnect between what was going on. But if you look at the journalism has come across, look at the last 3 weeks alone. Secretaries, cabinet secretaries forced to resign because uncovered of travel, continuous stream of people forced out of the administration.
Brilliant.
Yeah, sexual harassment uncovered at a systemic scale at one of the world's. That is a profession. It is delivering every day, and I think that actually we are in a thriving period of journalism, both in the U.S. and globally.
Kate, quickly, you get the last word because we're out of time. But have you given any thought about trying to deal with these populist leaders in a different way?
I guess I'm in furious agreement that our role is not really to bring down a leader or to, support another leader. Our role is to cover politics, to explain to our readers, many of whom need to use our journalism as part of their working lives, explain to them what's going on and set that in some kind of context, and of course call people up, as Politico did, on travel and other examples. I think that's absolutely still the role of media. What I would say is the media has arguably been slow to really understand some of the dynamics of digital, and I think the media, along with almost everybody else, and I think there's some catching up for all of us to do in understanding how new mediums work and how some of these new methods of communication work. But I think what people say is still important. We've just got to find better ways to get to the truth, or as close to the truth as we can, about how people are using these tools and what it is they're saying, and set that in some kind of context. But fundamentally, the role of the media is the same. We've just got to keep getting better at doing it.
Yeah. And let me just conclude with a wonderful definition from George Orwell about what is journalism. And he said journalism is to publish something that somebody else does not want published. The rest is public relations. And I think that's so relevant to us. It's so relevant. Kate, Megan, Aroon, Jerzy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, panelists. A really great and insightful panel there.